The Nicene Creed is an example of what happens when unbelievers, like pagan philosophers and especially politicians, like Roman emperors, get mixed up in religion. First comes confusion, since the creed itself is replete with ambiguous and contradictory language. For example, the creed violates the later Trinitarian formula of three distinct hypostases in one ousia, or three persons in one being or substance. According to the noted church historian Richard Hansen, for at least the first half of the period between 318 to 381 AD, and in some cases considerably later, ousia and hypostasis are used as virtual synonyms. As a result, the Creed condemned anyone who said the Son of God is of a different hypostasis or ousia from the Father. Yet today, Trinitarians would charge you with blasphemy if you taught this section of their creed. Dr. Hansen added that not many who have written upon the subject of the creed have observed the serious difficulty presented by it. And in fact, there were present at the council people such as Marcellus of Ancyra, who were quite ready to maintain that there is only one hypostasis in the Godhead, and who were later to be deposed for heresy because they believed this. So, however Trinitarians today try to spin it, the creed produced by the council was a mine of potential confusion and consequently most unlikely to be a means of ending the Arian controversy. Yet this confusion was not unique to those at Nicaea in 325 AD. Hundreds of years earlier, Tertullian wrote, "There was a time when there was no sun." The historian J. D. Kelly found that Tertullian followed the apologists in dating the beginning of the sun to the Genesis creation, because prior to that moment, God could not strictly be said to have had a son. A few years later, Origen described the sun both as having come into existence and as a creature at a period when nobody distinguished having come into existence from begotten. Yet Origen is known as the father of the so-called eternal generation of the Son. Secondly, many Christians think that the Trinity issue was completely resolved in 325 AD at Nicaea. This is far from the truth, as the American church historian Yaroslav Pelikan explains. During those first 3.5 centuries, the church was gradually drawing out the fuller implications of the creed. That process was by no means unilinear, but involved continual struggles to find the best words for speaking what was ultimately ineffable when articulating the faith of the church. The outcome of those struggles over language was highly complicated and often almost counterintuitive. Thirdly, a strong argument can be made for the fact that the creed is in reality a Platonic creed. Church historians, like Dr. Hansen and others, have noted how words like hypostasis and ousia were borrowed key terms from Platonism. Philo, the influential pagan figure of Christianity, himself described the three angelic visitors to Abraham of Genesis 18 not as three persons but as one, and calls them God from God, light of light. William Inga, the famous professor of divinity, admitted that Platonism is part of the vital structure of Christian theology. Dr. Inga added that if Christians read Plotinus, who worked to reconcile Platonism with Scripture, they would understand better the real continuity between the old culture and the new religion, and they might realize the utter impossibility of excising Platonism from Christianity without tearing Christianity to pieces. Therefore, early Christianity, from its very beginning, was formed by a confluence of Jewish and Hellenic religious ideas. Thus, another noted church historian, Will Durant, was right to say that Christianity did not destroy paganism, it adopted paganism. The Greek language, having reigned for centuries over philosophy, became the vehicle of Christian literature and ritual. Other pagan syncretist results. From Egypt came the ideas of a divine trinity and the mystic theosophy that made Neoplatonism and Gnosticism and obscured the Christian creed. Christianity was the last great creation of the ancient pagan world. The fact is that the so-called Church Fathers' conception of the Trinity was a combination of Jewish monotheism and pagan polytheism, except that to them this combination was a good combination. This, according to Dr. Harry Wolfson, a history and philosopher professor at Harvard University in the 1950s. In fact, for the Church Fathers, this was an ideal combination of what is best in Jewish monotheism and of what is best in pagan polytheism. And consequently, these so-called Church Fathers gloried in it and pointed to it as evidence of their belief. Dr. Wolfson says that we have on this the testimony of one Gregory of Nyssa, when he wrote that the truth passes in the mean between these two conceptions, destroying each heresy and yet accepting what is useful to it from each. The Jewish dogma is destroyed, while the polytheistic error of the Greek school is made to vanish by the unity of the nature, abrogating this imagination of plurality. And John of Damascus, the last of the Church Fathers, wrote that on the one hand, of the Jewish idea we have the unity of God's nature, and on the other, of the Greek, we have the distinction of hypostases.